This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. You can join our conversation at WNPR.org/The Wheelhouse. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. You can always call us at 860-275-7266 as we talk about the news of the week. We're also on CTN today. The cameras of the Connecticut Network are here for us. Colin McEnroe is also here, as always. He's host of the Colin McEnroe Show on Connecticut Public Radio. Howdy, Colin.
Please don't touch me, John. Don't touch me.
We'll get
You're
to
too
that.
close.
We'll get
You're
to
too
that.
close.
The folks at CTN can clearly see that I'm nowhere near you, and we'll be getting to that story in just a little bit. Christine Stewart is here. She's editor-in-chief of CTNewsJunkie.com. Welcome back, Christine.
Good morning.
And Kevin Rennie is here. He's an attorney. He's a Hartford Courant columnist, and he blogs at dailyructions.com. Welcome back, Kevin. Good to see you.
Thank you, John. It's very nice to be here.
Our friends at Where We Live have been doing a series of pre-primary interviews for those running for governor. 5 of the 7 candidates sat down with Lucy Nalpathanchel to answer her questions, and a lot of your questions as well. The only 2 who didn't join in, not surprisingly, the self-funding Fairfield County candidates, Bob Stefanowski and David Stemmerman. A bit more about that a little bit later. So what do we learn during these interviews, and what else are we learning about campaigns? These candidates on the campaign trail? We're going to start with the Democrats this week. Joe Ganim, as we know, spent 7 years in federal prison for corruption-related offenses. Lucy tried to get Ganim to answer the question of whether voters can rely on him not to go down that path again. Here's a little bit of that interview.
What changed personally inside you that makes voters think that they can trust you if elected to be governor?
Yeah, I thought I tried to answer as best I could, but maybe since you asked it again, let me try one more time. Learn from errors. When you fall down and you get up, you wonder why you fell, what you did wrong, and ensure that that will never, ever happen again. You'll do everything and take even special extra precautions. As I've said, we've made efforts, and I would do this as governor, to make it the most transparent state government, like we've made Bridgeport the most transparent local government or city government. I did the same thing with our campaigns. And those become a part of governing that, because of my experiences that I've learned and have instilled in at a local level and would do at a state level. And that will go a long way, I think, even over and above what's going on now.
Lucy, Colin tried a couple times to get him to talk through this. I don't know if what we wanted to hear was an apology for his actions while in office, but certainly if you're going to run the entire state of Connecticut, one that has been troubled by corruption in the top office before, we might just add. I'm wondering if you think we might need to get a better answer from Joe Ganim.
Well, he uses words. You heard him there use the word error. And during the recent SHU debate, he said that he didn't use words like mistake, and then he used the word mistake, and he used the word error in judgment at the SHU. These are not mistakes. These are not errors in judgment. These were crimes. They were crimes committed in a very pervasive way. People remember the red wine and the shirts, and maybe the red wine got on the shirts, but we're really talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes, and a system in Bridgeport under Ganim where every major transaction was subjected to the fundamental Joe Ganim question: what's in it for me? Not what's in it for Bridgeport. What is in it for me? And many times these payments were not they were often parked in these kind of holding accounts, and his 2 confederates would pay money out to him or buy him things. But sometimes it was the good old-fashioned cash in the envelope. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about mistakes and errors in judgment. We're talking about a mayor who persistently and pervasively took hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes from people who were trying to do business in his city. And I have yet to hear him say something that's persuasively transformative about that. I think if you have to resort to the lexicon of errors and mistakes, you haven't come to grips with it.
Well, but beyond those words, he talks about taking special extra precautions, much like someone who overeats might put a lock on the refrigerator so as to not get up in the middle of the night and have an extra sandwich, but that doesn't get at the root of the problem, it would seem.
Right. I mean, there's a really easy precaution to take. Don't commit crimes anymore. Don't take bribes. I mean, that's the precaution he should have taken way back then. Like a lot of people, first of all, like a lot of people, if you remove this from the equation, you could argue that the person who has run the most interesting, dynamic, and at times thoughtful campaign has been Joe Ganim. You could even argue that the person with the most civic administrative experience in the entire field is Joe Ganim. But you can't remove this, and I don't think he has ever succeeded in putting it in a place where people could look at it and say, yes, he's not that kind of person anymore, because so much of his language seems to really kind of back off from that fundamental reality.
Christine, you're out with these people a lot more than we are on the campaign trail, seeing what they're doing. Are we hearing something different from Joe Ganim than what we hear in this interview or at the debates?
No, I think this is exactly what we're hearing, and I think that this unapologetic is why he did not get his law license back when he got out of prison. So I think the other interesting aspect is that, he was just reelected in 2015 to run the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut's largest city, which obviously has some issues. And, he's now running for statewide office. So, it's unclear how often he's actually in Bridgeport doing his job. He'll say that he's there all the time and that it's a 24/7 job and that he can chew gum and walk at the same time.
At the center of a criminal enterprise, convicted on 16 counts. Got to grab what you can grab while you can grab it and grab it. That was the famous testimony that came out of that trial a long time ago. That was his philosophy of government at the time, was you got to grab what you can grab while you can grab it.
Do you agree, in part at least, though, with Colin, that if you were to take that aside and or you were to have a better explanation or more contrition for those actions, that you have someone here who is running a dynamic campaign, someone who does have the requisite administrative experience to perhaps run the state? Kevin.
I just don't think he's ever confronted this in a public way, in the way that a reasonable person would expect. Somehow lurking in that answer is, and I'm a victim too. And I haven't seen him get past that. And the other thing is, look, I've said many times on the campaign trail, I hear people say he does the best job. Mm-hmm. But then when I hear him, he doesn't really say very much about what he would do in January facing a $4 billion deficit.
I want to say, though, that he really had people going, not last week, the week before last week. People were actually looking for a reason to vote for him. And he had Ned Lamont on his heels for the most part until Ned Lamont and his campaign started pushing about the police shootings.
Yeah, and let's actually turn to that. During this interview that we played a little bit of, a caller brought up last year's police shooting death of 15-year-old Jason Negron. In January, Waterbury State's Attorney Maureen Platt, who led the state's investigation, found the shooting was justified, cleared a Bridgeport police officer. The controversy continues. Ganim is facing protesters' questions on the campaign trail quite a bit about why he didn't do more in that case. And the question remains, Colin, did Ganim do a good job in responding to some of these concerns, and does it hurt his messaging that he's a champion of Connecticut cities?
He's in a very sticky position here because so much of his campaign base is Bridgeport. So much of his campaign money comes from Bridgeport. There are people who are prepared to bet you money that he will lose 168 towns on August 14th and win Bridgeport. So what he says about Bridgeport is really important because also there's a substantial possibility he's headed back there too, as opposed to Hartford. I think for a mayor to throw the police chief under the bus, not that Joe Ganim isn't capable of doing that, but that's a pretty major step. I don't think there's any question that, for example, Bridgeport is behind in areas like body cameras. By the way, it's not the case that they don't have any, but they kind of got into the swimming pool a little bit late on that one. And you do need to say something probably ultimately if you're going to run towards a larger audience, if you're going to court an urban vote, which is, of course, what he's depending on. He can't possibly win this primary without a huge urban vote. You probably do have to say something a little stronger than anything that Ganim has said about this so far.
And is he saying anything, Christine? I mean, what is his response to this?
Well, he is between a rock and a hard place. I don't know how many, if the investigation is still open, how much he can say in his role as an elected official down there, and and taking on his own police chief. I think that's problematic. He's
for the underdog until he's not for the underdog, and he's in this case he's essentially sticking with the establishment, which is what he's kind of run an anti-establishment campaign. Although it's always sort of funny to see someone who's spent much of their life at the heart of government suddenly running against others who are at the heart of it. And he's run a clever campaign, getting under Ned Lamont's skin and highlighting some things that are harder on Democrats to take than on Republicans. And yet, Ned Lamont's got to be careful because he's going to need that Bridgeport Democratic machine in November. And so, there's not really been a full-on assault on the Ganim campaign by Lamont.
Well, and that's one thing I wanted to ask you about, though, is Colin suggests many people think Joe Ganim could win Bridgeport and lose all 168 other towns. I'm wondering, are the Democrats in jeopardy of having one candidate who likely will not make it to November, sucking up an awful lot of what's happening in the cities, and another candidate who's not as well known in the cities going out to all the suburban towns and some of the rural towns and really not speaking to the entire state?
Well, you have that in any statewide campaign. Although some regional appeals or specific appeals to their local circumstances, but generally, I think the candidates are talking about Connecticut in a wider view of what our troubles are, and then as they go to different places, they talk about local concerns. But I do think when they speak, there's an overlay of these are the things that are troubling Connecticut, need to be addressed.
Well, I think in a Democratic primary, obviously, you have to concentrate on the cities because that's where the Democratic voters are. Right. I'm not quite sure how excited Democrats are about Ned Lamont's campaign, and so what is going to get them to the polls on primary day?
Especially when we're looking at numbers that are going to be so small. We've talked about this a lot on the Republican side, Colin, but how few votes could win a Republican primary. It seems as though a pretty small number of votes could win a Democratic primary as well, and we're not going to see huge turnout in the cities.
Right. In 2006, Ned Lamont had a specifically urban strategy for going after Joe Lieberman. They spent a lot of time and a lot of money going into the cities. And they had people like Maxine Waters here in the state going, around the North End, talking on behalf of Ned Lamont. Now, having said that, I don't think that people, when Ned Lamont leaves some community center in New Haven, people go, wow, he gets me. I just don't think that that's sort of how Ned Lamont typically comes across. But I would say during the general, they are going to have to run hard in the cities. When Joe Ganim is gone, they will need, as Kevin says, the cities in the general election, and Ned Lamont is going to have some kind of coherent vision. And I think Ganim has kind of owned the cities and the urban argument so far. But on August 15th, assuming that Ned Lamont wins the primary, he's going to have to start winning the urban argument.
One of the things that you foreshadowed at the beginning of the program, Colin, was a little bit of a testy exchange between the two of them at this most recent debate. Ned Lamont putting his hand on Joe Ganim's shoulder, saying essentially, Joe, relax, settle down, and Ganim saying, please don't touch me, and it's snapping back at him. I don't know. We've spent a lot of time talking about how the Republicans are at each other's throats during this debate. I don't know if this is exactly the same thing, Colin, but it does tonally suggest a little something different than we've seen during the Democratic campaign so far.
Yeah, first of all, this is we should say the first thing, which is this is maybe the first time in recorded history that a WASP voluntarily touched a person who wasn't his Exeter roommate. So that in itself is kind of weird. Ned Lamont comes from a culture where people don't touch each other that much.
I thought it was a brilliant move, that Ganim is a former prisoner.
Well, yeah.
What do you do in prison? You don't touch.
No touching.
No touching in prison.
We know this from Arrested Development.
I wondered if it was calculated.
You don't touch the other candidate in a debate. Just don't. It's one of those lines you don't go. Remember when Rick Lasio thrust that pledge in front of Hillary Clinton, and it's just people don't want to be.
Or more recently, Trump stalking Hillary Clinton around the stage.
Oh yeah, and Al Gore behind George W. Bush,
right.
And you just
But I think it might have been
a sense of space that we sort of have a universal sense of it, and don't touch.
I think it might have been, as Christine says, not a bad move for Lamont to sort of say, well, come on, little fella, you're getting a lot of control here. I think the important thing, if there's an important thing about this, is what we've seen in these debates, Republican and Democrat, is starting to seem more and more like 2016 in the national Republican debates, a level of nastiness and personal attack, which maybe I'm sugarcoating my memories. I mean, I know that, say, Malloy and Foley had some pretty testy exchanges and stuff like that, but, Stefanowski calling Herbst Timmy, it's turning into that kind of who's got the small hands conversation. I hope this isn't some kind of trend where, the bar really has been lowered.
These things don't get better. they do. The trajectory is all one direction.
And it really is true, Christine. I don't think that we put the genie back in the bottle on the way the campaigns are run or on the type of behavior we see during debates. If what happened in 2016 with 17 Republicans up there on Fox News and whatever other channel, yelling at each other for hours on end, if that sets the tone for 2018 and 2020, I can only imagine we head in this direction and not backward.
Well, I think that the reason that people use negative advertising is that it works. And I think that we're going to see a barrage of that, over the next few weeks. I think we're going to probably see more negative ads. And if anyone has Fox, it's already running constantly. They're just back to back to back to back to back.
That's all you see.
That's all you see.
Well, one of the things that
Someone tell you that?
Yeah. Christine has Fox on all the time at home.
Yeah. I think Fox, by the way, is part of the basic cable package. I think pretty much everybody has Fox.
Let me ask you this.
Unless they're a millennial and they've cut the cord.
And they've cut the cord.
You
An
know.
awful lot of people have cut the cord. One of the things, before we take a break, though, Colin, one of the things we say certainly on public radio, we think, well, all this incivility when people aren't kind to one another, it's going to drive people away. People won't be as engaged in the democratic process. Well, it seems as though we've had a little surge in voter registrations leading up to this August primary. That doesn't mean a whole lot of people are going to turn out, but it seems as though registrations are up.
Registrations are way up, and there's a wave of registrations. However, that doesn't necessarily invalidate the first part of what you said. One of the things that I think that people are sort of under-remarking about this. So since the last cycle, 80,000 new Democratic registrations, 40,000 new Republican registrations. That's pretty much pretty close to what the actual existing proportions are. Not exactly, but close enough. There have been, I think, about 140,000 unaffiliated registrations. So if you add Democrats and Republicans together, you still don't get how many unaffiliated registrations. And I actually do think that's a significant number. That's not, by the way, what the existing proportions are, even though affiliateds make up the largest group in Connecticut. Not like that. Not like if you add the two existing parties together, there's still more of them. To me, that goes back to your original point. People, and there are a lot of young people in these new registrations, are very turned off by both political parties. And you pay a pretty high price in Connecticut for being unaffiliated. You will not be participating in the process on August 14th. So, and whether they know that or not is another question. But more people want to vote but not be affiliated with a party. I think that's an important truth that maybe gets lost in these numbers.
You have until August 9th to do that. If you are unaffiliated voter, you have until August 9th to register online, and then until noon on August 13th to register in person in your town if you want to vote in the primary.
So you can still change to take part in this primary if you want to. It gets back to one of my long bugaboos, though, Kevin. Is this the right system? If we have so many more unaffiliateds, if people do not want to affiliate with one of these parties, should they be shut out of a primary system that's going to be so very important?
We did for a while. Republicans allowed unaffiliateds in the
Tom DeMore,
80s to vote in the primaries, and they didn't. So people are unaffiliated for a reason. Is that they just don't. They're not really interested in party politics. Look, we know this. Even the people who are registered in the parties, for the most part, are not going to be a very big turnout. Which is, to me, is one of the big surprises of this campaign. I thought people were more engaged. But as I've pondered this, I think they may see the political system as the source of more problems than it is the solution.
Absolutely. Although, it depends. What's a big turnout, too? 25% of the
25% is big.
They're going to come out on August 14th in the middle of the summer for a bunch of candidates you never heard of. I don't know. You could argue that's a pretty big turnout.
Well, you have a certain number of people who are dutiful primary voters.
Right.
And how do you increase that is really, that's a function of broader issues. And even with 5 candidates and a lot of money being spent, I think the turnout's not going to be very good. 4 years ago in the Republican primary for governor, it was really low.
When you say dutiful primary voters, you mean like older voters. I mean, that's the
Yes.
point is we're talking, there may be
Now,
enthusiasm amongst the young to register, but enthusiasm for a primary
older
is
voters.
older voters on both
Someone
sides
told
of
me
the aisle.
the average Republican statewide Republican primary voter is 60 years old.
It's the average.
Average.
Okay, when we come back, let's turn our attention to some of the Republicans. We're going to hear more from their candidate interviews on Where We Live, some interesting things. We're also going to talk about at least one candidate who doesn't want to seem to take part in any of these debates or talk to Christine Stewart for some reason. A lot of that coming up next. Christine Stewart is here. She's editor-in-chief of CTNewsJunkie.com. Kevin Rennie is an attorney. He's a Hartford Courant columnist. He also blogs at DailyRuctions.com. And our own Colin McEnroe is here as well. I'm John Dankosky. This is The Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. You can always join our conversation online, WNPR.org/The Wheelhouse. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. And we're on CTN today. The cameras of the Connecticut Network are here. We're joined by Kevin Rennie from DailyRuctions.com and the Hartford Courant, Christine Stewart from CTNewsJunkie.com, and our own Colin McEnroe. Colin, what is on your show today?
Well, actually, we're going to be kind of teasing it a little bit towards the end of this discussion if we have time. The tiny town of Haddam has been convulsed by a kneeling spree. And so Melissa Schlag, a select woman in Haddam, is the state's now most notorious kneeler. And we know what happens when people start kneeling. Like more people start kneeling. I thought I saw you kneeling in your office the other day. I hope that's not true.
I had strained something.
I hope you weren't kneeling. Yeah, you said you were tying your shoe or something like that. If I find out you're kneeling.
We're going to be talking about kneeling a little bit later on in this program and also on the Colin McEnroe Show at 1 o'clock. I will tell you before we get into some of what the Republican candidates have been saying that I'm going to be moderating a debate that the Connecticut Conference of Independent Colleges is putting on with us, Connecticut Public Radio, with our friends at the Connecticut Mirror, and also NBC Connecticut. It is happening on Monday, August 6th from 7 o'clock to 8:30 at Fairfield University. Almost all of the Republican candidates will be there. I'll be joined on stage by Mark Pasniokis of The Mirror, Max Reese of NBC Connecticut, and Vanessa De La Torre of Connecticut Public Radio asking questions, and we'll have more information for you on our website as well.
Are you going to lay out ground rules the way Ken Dixon does, where he goes, in the case of a personal attack, you'll receive 2 minutes to respond. If you're actually kicked in the groin by one of the other candidates, you'll have 1 minute to recover from that, and then 2 minutes to speak.
I think the only ground rule is going to be no touching. There will be no touching during this debate.
How are you going to enforce that rule?
Oh, I will mix it up with them. I will physically separate people. Trust me.
Bring Frankie. Bring Frankie Graziano with you.
No, just bring the kittens.
Just bring the kittens. I know the kittens will make everything.
I would not trust those people around kittens.
Every mainstream Protestant in Connecticut is counting on you.
Yeah, we will enforce the rules. Now on Tuesday, Republican Tim Herbst was in the Where We Live hot seat talking with Lucy Nalpathanchel. Here's what he said when asked how he would address budget deficit projections and state pension liabilities.
I have said that if I'm elected governor, I will send a budget repair bill to the legislature in my first 45 days in office. That includes meaningful pension and benefit reform and restructuring. Now, let me just say, I think I bring a unique perspective in the sense that I have 2 retired parents that are receiving pensions from the state of Connecticut, and they are concerned as retirees as to whether their retirement security will be in place for the years to come. What I've said is we have to honor the commitments that we've made to our retirees, but we have to recognize that we have to curb this problem in a very meaningful way. So I've talked about doing what I did in Trumbull, putting new hires into a defined contribution plan. We're going to have to look at increasing contribution levels depending upon years of service. The state of Connecticut needs to get out of the retiree healthcare business.
Okay, so that's a bit of what Tim Herbst told Lucy Nalpathanchel. In that interview, Colin, at times he seemed to suggest that Governor Malloy had done some good things in terms of tackling the pension obligations. He said that he was going to roll out a plan that was more reasonable than his other Republican challengers. Then the talk turned to his criminal justice plan, and things changed tone quite a bit. What did you make of some of what Tim Herbst talked to Lucy about, both on his ability to curb the big fiscal problems plaguing the state, and then at the same time saying we are in a lawless society that we need to crack down on?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think the interview took place in two phases. And at the beginning, he was, borderline statesman-like. And then he turned into a Chucky doll, which it's a mode that we are familiar with. So just to that clip, and my guess is that Christine will have some pretty good numbers or insights on this better than I will. But first of all, anybody who knows about Tim Herbst's family and family problems has no problem believing that he would cut one of his parents off in order to reform the pension system. But, and this is the thing I'm going to kind of defer to Christine on, new hires are not the problem. New hires are not where the drain is. Pensions and benefits for new hires have been radically recalibrated. So, the next person...
A long time ago.
The next person gets hired by the state of Connecticut is not part of the problem. Tim Herbst's parents are part of the problem. Depending on which tier they're in, where they are in that system, that's where the problem lies. But I would rather just quickly talk about what I think is pretty disingenuous talk about criminal justice reform. Herbst routinely portrays the Second Chance Initiative of the Malloy administration as an abject failure. It's not. I mean, I think by almost any metric, it is a success. He cited this weird statistic where he said that 95% of the people in the first wave of the program were recidivists. I don't know, where's that come from? Basically, what's happened is prison population is shrinking, recidivism rates are falling, violent crime is falling during the time of the period, during the period of the Second Chance Initiative.
I'm sorry, but
yeah.
a lot of this is demographics.
Sure.
Connecticut is old. Mm-hmm. Old people do not commit crimes.
Right, but some of it's also this program.
I mean, some of it is, but the other part, the reason that there are fewer people being convicted of crimes is that there are so many diversion programs that you can be arrested and you may have to participate in something, but you don't have a conviction on your record. It doesn't mean they're not committing criminal acts.
Right,
it means that we have a system that has, I believe, 17 diversion programs.
But his argument is that terrible violent criminals are being turned loose.
I understand. I understand.
He's not making the argument that you're making right now. He's saying, and he used the Norwich murders, which I think is cheap demagoguery. Those two offenders were not out on the program that he's talking about. They were out on sort of a conventional parole process where they'd served 85% of sentence. I think demagoguing a vicious murder like that to make your political points and skeeting around the reality of how those two particular offenders got out it's kind of disgusting. So I don't know how you call the Second Chance Initiative an abject failure. It's being studied by other states. Republicans typically nationwide tend to agree. We've got to stop locking so many people up. I just running against that seems bizarre to me.
No, I agree about the number of people we put in prison and for the sentences. But I don't think I think we have to remember that these programs in Connecticut have been enforced and administered and available for many years preceding Dan Malloy.
Some
of them have.
No, many diversionary programs.
Oh, diversionary programs.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, have been part of Connecticut. I mean, we were way ahead of other states in this a long time ago.
So Christine, this is one of the interesting things about how each of these candidates, especially on the Republican side, positions themselves, because each of them has to do the thing that we all want them to do, which is explain how they're going to solve the real problem that we know that we're facing, right? This gigantic structural budget deficit. We have pension liabilities. We have issues that we can't really deal with in any substantive way, and you've got to come up with some sort of a plan to get out of that. But then, because you're running in a Republican primary, you're also going to take one or two other issues that you are going to try to appeal to. And Tim Herbst has said, basically, we have a problem with crime in Connecticut. And as Colin has suggested, I don't know that the numbers bear that out.
No, I think that kind of defies reality. And it actually goes against some of what's been happening at the national level, too. I mean, the Koch brothers have been, the Koch brothers actually teamed up with Valerie Jarrett and have been, promoting the
Koch
Second
brothers
Chance
who Donald Trump hates now. Yes,
right. Yeah, the Koch brothers who Donald Trump hates now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but I think
Dan
that,
Malloy hates.
Yeah.
I think that if you look at this problem, even even federal prisoners can actually earn good time credits and get 54 days off their sentence per year. So I'm not sure. I get that he's trying to speak to his base. I'm not sure that it's going to work.
Every governor has to submit a budget in about 45 days after they take office. There's nothing unusual about that when he says, I will submit something in 45 days. Yes, that's what they do.
And then he will lay off all of
They all
Malloy's
do that.
commissioners.
He was
And
just
that's exactly what
reminding
happens.
people that that's part of
Yes.
the job.
And but he doesn't want to talk about, and almost all of them don't, the $4 billion deficit that the next governor is going to face when he takes office. And look, nothing gets done at the Capitol of any significance until the governor and the legislature address the budget deficit that's right in front of them.
It's $4.6 billion.
4.6, all right, but who's...
So
Right.
who's counting? Yeah, apparently they have no idea.
And that's because it's Wednesday. It will be more tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, Mark Boughton was also in the show. He raised the idea of going to court to push through pension reforms well before the current CBAC contract regarding state employees runs out in 2027. Now, here's what Mark Boughton told Lucy.
I also would argue to you that a reorg plan, and this is something that will have to be decided in court, but a reorg plan is different than layoffs. A reorg plan is reorganization. And if it's adopted by the legislature in for the next biennium budget, that means that it's not a layoff, it's just a new organization for government, and those employees are not necessarily entitled to bumping rights or to be able to move somebody off of another position somewhere else. I think that'll have to be adjudicated in a court, it'll have to be decided in a court, but that's our argument. So we don't necessarily see 2027 as a date that we can't do anything. We're going to have to do something, or you're literally going to end up with one state trooper, an entire Metro Hartford area doing traffic enforcement, because we just won't be able to afford anything else.
So that's Mark Boughton's plan. He says he's going to go to court, and the courts will settle it, Colin.
Well, this is, in all the ways that have been sketched out here, an unpromising situation. And probably many of the answers to this unpromising situation will be unpromising. But I would say a plan that relies on the notion of immediately getting sued is one of the more unpromising scenarios you could lay out there, because these things tend to drag on and there's no guarantee that you'll win. In fact, it's hard to understand on what basis you think you're going to win the lawsuit. So it just seems like an odd first step.
No, I think he has. I think what he's relying on is in the agreement with the unions. There's some language about some changes in the structure of government. I think it's going to be very difficult to hang a wholesale deficit reduction program on that.
I don't see how that doesn't drag out so the layoff protections only extend for two years of the next term.
Half your term.
So half your
the
term.
first half of your term.
Right, the first half of your term.
Yes.
But I think that a lawsuit could drag out
It could.
just that long that, why would you even waste the
Although
state's money
if there's
at that
a
point?
crisis, and if there's an administrative crisis in state government, it is likely to be addressed more quickly by a court. But I also, that's not what a candidate for governor should be talking about. It's not, I'm going to go to court. When I was in the legislature a long time ago, I always, whenever there was some legislative point, not whatever, but at times when there was, and a legislator would say, well, we'll just have to let the courts decide. And I thought, no, that's why we're here. We're
That's actually the job. And do you think, what happens in court, do you think, Kevin, as a lawyer, when that lawsuit is filed, where a governor just goes in and says, we're going to move around state government, this isn't a layoff, we're going to do things the way we say we're going to do it, and we're going to let the courts decide. What does the court say?
Well, you mean a new governor is going to say, we're going to try to ignore this agreement that my predecessor reached with unions, and then the legislature approved. A court may very well say, look, we try not to intervene in the democratic process. And
when two of the three branches already agree on something, man, us getting involved in the third.
areas that are completely within their purview as well.
Exactly.
It also could be really fun if you wind up with Boughton, who's governor, and William Tong, who's been endorsed by all these state employees unions, is the AG. I sometimes you have to contract out for a big lawsuit like that anyway, but the AG would have to oversee that lawsuit.
Yes, unless they found some reason to take it out of his
Right.
hands, but that's not easy to do. But also, Mark Boughton is he likes his litigation. He was very involved with his education funding case for years that ultimately failed at the Supreme Court. But he wanted to overturn the formula for funding local schools that the legislature and the governor had worked out over many years.
I want to quickly, before we turn to some of the candidates who have not been on Where We Live, I want to just get to Jim in Windsor Locks. Hey, Jim, thanks for hanging on. What's your thought?
Yes, I just wanted you guys in the media to clarify something because I just went through this with the registrar and voters in my town, okay? If you are presently enrolled as a voter, you had to have changed your party affiliation prior to Monday, May 14th,
Right.
or 90 days before this primary.
If you're affiliated with
the
one party and
party.
you want to change to the other. In other words, if you're unaffiliated, you don't have that burden. But if you're a
No.
Republican, registered Republican, you want to change to a Democrat, you missed the window. But as Christine pointed out earlier, if you're unaffiliated and you want to affiliate, you can do that.
So Jim,
No,
you're saying that that's
wrong.
not the case. That's not what you heard. Go ahead.
No, I got. You need to research this because the registrar of voters are saying you're driving them nuts because you have to. I'm reading it from the list here. It says here for a primary, your application has to be postmarked. This is for a new voter. Okay, it has to be postmarked by the 5th day before the primary, or you have up to noon of the business day prior to the
Right.
primary. Okay,
So that's
but if
August
you are
9th and
already
August 13th.
registered as unaffiliated Democrat or Republican, you had to do this before May 9th, May 14th.
So, Jim, and your town again is Windsor Locks?
Yeah.
Okay, and thank you for that.
Well, people who are already registered with a political party who want to switch to a different party, they're treated differently
Right.
than unaffiliated voters.
Right, it's too
Unaffiliated
late for
voters,
them.
right? It's too
Right.
late for them. But unaffiliated voters can still switch.
Jim, thank you very much for your phone call. I think it's probably important.
But that 90-day rule kept banking executive Jim Smith out of the Republican race.
That's right. That's right. He wasn't properly registered to run. Let's talk about, since we're talking, Christine, about someone who flirts with different parties periodically. Bob Stefanowski has been facing some criticism about his time spent as a Democrat. This is one of the things that has come up in a lot of these GOP debates. And it it skirts around some of the issues that maybe are a little bit more important. Stefanowski's been an interesting character. From what we understand, he may not be at this debate that I had mentioned previously at Fairfield University that is going to include the other Republicans. He's not taken part in all the debates. He has decided not to come talk with us here on Where We Live. He's been a little harder to track down for people like you covering the campaign, too.
He has. So not unlike Linda McMahon, I guess, we had trouble tracking her down on the campaign trail, too. Bob Stefanowski has not been out there really on the campaign trail doing retail politics, talking to the media, doing conventional things. He was the first with television ads. He did hold a press conference back in December of 2017, which Kevin and I both attended, with Art Laffer, who he paid $75,000 to come up with an economic plan.
50 for the plan.
Right, 50 for the plan and
25
$25,000
to make
for the tour.
appearances, yes.
And so he's largely avoided scrutiny, and I think that he's benefited by avoiding scrutiny. I think that he is ahead in the polls. We have no public polling in this race.
Yeah, so what polls?
So the polls would be internal polls paid for by Republicans, and this is just background information that I have received that he seems to be ahead in the polls and that he is being targeted by advertising from other candidates.
That's
because
always
of that.
that's the clearest indication.
Right, and yeah.
Well, I can't reveal my source. You're just going to have to trust me.
I trust you.
Christopher Steele.
Thank you. He is no longer ahead in the polls.
Oh, interesting.
No longer ahead in the polls as of
Recently.
Very recently. Who is ahead in the polls?
Well, I think that there is a sort of a little group at the top. Boughton, I think Herbst and Stefanowski, Stemmerman are a little bit behind. Obsitnik is way behind. It is simply not going to be a factor.
I don't believe internal polls because I can't see them. I can't look at the data science behind them. So I don't, for the most part, talk about them, even if people wave them in my faces. I also need to know exactly how the questions were asked. Sometimes the questions are asked about a kind of generic candidate. What would you think about somebody who used to be Inspector General of the United States as compared to all these numbnuts over here who have never done anything? The questions can be worded in ways that kind of push you.
Yeah, they can. I'm telling you, he's no longer the leader.
What I think
right?
is,
and I believe it.
I'm prepared to believe.
Was at one point.
He was.
Because
He
people
absolutely was.
were
Otherwise,
attacking.
they wouldn't have spent all this money on grainy pictures of
exactly.
of him not voting.
That's how you know that they think that anyway. I will say,
but
that
I think
first
it's
of all,
worked. I think negative advertising works.
I
think
this race is so fluky. There's so many candidates, so few voters. The data science is going to have a hard time predicting this. And I'm sure you're having the same experience that I do. As I talk to operatives and people who are very familiar with how campaigns typically unfold, everybody has a working hypothesis that's different from the last person that you talk to. One thing I hear a lot about Herbst is that he's door knocking better than everybody else, that he's relying on personal contact. Whether personal contact with Tim Herbst is a plus is something that we can debate separately, but he's relying on personal contact in a way that other people are relying on mail pieces. And that may, if this is a very narrow election based on a very small group of votes, help him tremendously. But I have no idea whether that's, that's just something people
I do think Mark Boughton has an advantage in that he has a very strong base in Greater Danbury, where there are a significant number of registered Republican primary voters.
And I don't think that they're moving. I think his base is pretty much solid. They're not changing their minds.
In a crowded primary like this, one formula is you do very, very well in a significant portion of the state. And then as the endorsed candidate, if he can run second and third everywhere else, that can be enough.
And before we break, Christine, just circling back to Stefanowski, you mentioned earlier Linda McMahon. I mean, we've had some experience in Connecticut in recent years with people who want to stay out of the media spotlight, want to pay for whether or not it's direct mail pieces or lots and lots of television advertising. That's what Bob Stefanowski has done so far. And we've seen this not work in the past.
Yeah, I was going to say, so in Linda McMahon's first campaign, that was very much her. I think that she changed in her second campaign and that she kind of learned that she does have to kind of play nice with the media and that she does need the earned media and that she does need to get out there and get around the state. So I think that was a lesson learned, and it might be a hard one for
I know
Mr.
we're short on time.
Stefanowski.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah, please.
Okay. You guys, who do you think Ned Lamont would like to run against? And who do you think he would really not like to run against?
I don't think he'd like to run against David Stemmerman and Mark Boughton. Mm-hmm. I think he would like to run against Tim Herbst, who's a kook, and and he'll as long as he doesn't get a Herbst cigar put out on his eyelid,
he's not going to put his hand on Tim's shoulder.
Make sure you tweet that Kevin said that, Scott.
No, I just he's look. You talk about you made reference to the Herbst family Meshuggah, and you have Tim Herbst with these lawsuits and his unsteady personality and the way he treated people in Trumbull and.
All right, so I want to go over to Christine, just so I'll get in trouble if I burn up our clock on this.
No, I was thinking that he would probably like to run against Tim Herbst. That would be the candidate he'd like to run against.
And he wouldn't like to run against,
Stemmerman or Stefanowski or Boughton. Yeah.
We're talking today with Christine Stewart from CTNewsJunkie.com, Kevin Rennie from DailyRuctions.com, and the Hartford Courant, and Colin McEnroe from Connecticut Public Radio. When we come back, a Haddam Town official has been taking some flack, let's just say, for kneeling during the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll tackle that important issue coming up next in the Wheelhouse. This is the Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky, talking about the week's news with Colin McEnroe, Kevin Rennie, and Christine Stewart. We just have a couple minutes left, but I want to turn to this story that's, of course, making now national headlines. Selectwoman Melissa Schlag knelt during the Pledge of Allegiance at a town meeting in protest of President Trump's summit in Finland with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Schlag knelt again on Monday, and people are exploding over this, Colin. It has to do with the Pledge of Allegiance. It has to do with public officials. It has to do with patriotism. Of course, it doesn't hurt that this is in the middle of a campaign season in which people are making their hay on this. You're going to be talking with Melissa Schlag this afternoon. What's your take on this?
Well, I mean, First of all, I think the Pledge of Allegiance itself is kind of an odd thing. You and I were talking about this yesterday. I think what she's doing is certainly within the realm of free speech. I think that people who get upset about this are either making political hay, as you say, or very insecure about their own relationship to their own country. I don't even understand why we need a Pledge of Allegiance. What are we worried about that we have to affirm this? But I want to give most of the time to the panelists because I'll be talking about this in the afternoon.
Yeah, Christine, when you hear about a controversy like this, especially at a town level, this is the sort of thing that can rock a small town like Haddam, and everyone can be talking about it. And this can be the most important thing, much more important, I suppose, in people's minds than how we're going to pay for cops or fixing the roads or anything else. When you see a controversy like this erupted at a town level, what do you think as someone who covers politics and government?
Well, what's interesting is that in this town, there have been two other local officials who have been doing this for more than a year, but nobody was really paying attention, and it didn't draw the same type of national media attention. So, I think it's just maybe the circumstances. It was, the time was right for people to begin paying attention. It's an election year. We've got 2 weeks before a primary. Obviously, you're going to take advantage of anything you can in order to talk to voters.
And it's become an issue. Tim Herbst and Art Linares, both Republicans, are using this as a bit of a rallying cry, Kevin.
Like Colin, I've always been a little mystified as to why we begin all these meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, where people are involved in their communities, and that demonstrates a certain amount of patriotism in itself. But I do, I think that this is one good reason why we have frequent elections in our towns, that people will be free to cast their ballot on her next year. And I think she seems kind of unpleasant about it, that she was quoted as saying the town was full of racists and fascists. I'm not sure what a Haddam fascist is all about. I'm not sure how that evinces itself.
I mean, how big is Haddam anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, what are we talking about?
1,700 people.
Well, I think a lot of this boils down to kayak policy.
I think it's over, like so much for our politics now. It's overwrought.
But what do you make, Kevin, though, of your party, the Republican Party, taking this hardline stand on social issues like this about whether or not Colin Kaepernick kneels in front of the Star Spangled Banner?
I am appalled at it. I'm appalled. I think that look, we have a First Amendment. It's first for a reason. The voters of Haddam will have their chance to act upon what she's doing, and is her kneeling really going to protesting it going to solve any problem in the state of Connecticut? Is that really going to help that 45-day plan that Tim Herbst is working on? No, it's not, and it is an attempt, I think, to divert attention from what we really need to be discussing in this election.
It really is a distraction.
Could I just quickly say, just circle back to one thing that came up earlier? So I just got on the Secretary of State's website. This is about the guy from Windsor Locks, Jim or Jack or whatever his name is. So it says there's a 3-month waiting period to change from one party to another. This does not apply when switching from unaffiliated to party membership. I think the point is here, not who's right, but that there's too much confusion. This guy, and my sympathies are with him. He's trying to get a straight answer out of his registrar's office. And we all know, those of us who've covered this thing, there are too many damn registrars in the state of Connecticut. There are too many different messages coming out. It's hard to find a voter who hasn't had some moment of unnecessary confusion, whether at a polling place or trying to figure out registration. It shouldn't be as hard as this. It shouldn't be as complicated. There shouldn't be so many mixed messages.
There's no same-day registration during the primary either.
And
it shouldn't be so hard
if you
to
are
get on
not
the ballot.
registered, you cannot vote.
And we've talked about this before too, Kevin. It should be easier to get on the ballot. It should be easier to actually vote. It should be easier to vote in the primary of your choice.
It used to be 6 months before it was reduced to 3 months, but because the people in the legislature, they don't want strangers coming into their political parties. They're worried about stampedes.
Open them up.
I will pledge allegiance to a system that works and is more inclusive for more people. Kevin Rennie is an attorney. He's a Hartford Current columnist. He blogs at dailyructions.com. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it. Thanks also
Thank
to
you.
Christine Stewart, editor-in-chief of CTNewsJunkie.com. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, John.
And thanks to our own Colin McEnroe. Have a good show this afternoon, Colin.
I object to the no plaid at the polls rule in Winstead. You wouldn't be able to vote today. That's not right. That's just not right.
Scott Brady produces The Wheelhouse. Our executive producers, Katie Tolarski. Thanks to Kyan Wolf, our technical producer. I'm John Dankosky.